were laser focused on productivity-led growth. Most of the finance ministers talked about private sector leading their countries in their own jurisdictions, whereas government only providing the policy framework and policy continuity. Most of the finance that improving governance, therefore ownership and accountability at the government level is the right thing to do. Deregulation, cutting the red tape, putting the bureaucracy down. In fact, from Argentina, the minister who represented Argentina was not Minister of Finance, was actually Minister of Deregulation. No surprises there. The third one was fiscal prudence, domestic resource mobilization, and prioritization on the expenditure front. So differentiating between good costs and bad costs, which obviously require very tough policy choices, as we are seeing here in Pakistan as well. The second last thing I would mention is, which was very important and was very encouraging, because in this whole scheme of things, you can appreciate there are countries which are well endowed, and there are countries which require help. And the topic of this discussion was shared challenges and shared future. And the fact that this South-South collaboration, where well-endowed countries are willing, ready, and able to step up to help other emerging economies, working with each other in terms of not only increasing investment and trade flows, but also the technical support, because that's where capacity building comes in. And the last thing is that everyone appreciated the fact that global trade may not be a lever of growth anymore because of everything that we are seeing. However, the regional connectivity and the corridors, and whether we can work with each other, agar main Pakistan ke context mein dekhun, what we need to do more with GCC, what we need to do more with Africa, what we need to do more with Central Asian republics, Turkey, etc., it made a lot of sense that we move in that direction from a South-South collaboration perspective. So I just wanted to mention this to this audience. So उसमें ये जानना कि बहुत idiosyncratic risk है और ना कोई ऐसी बहुत ऐसा challenge है जो बाकी emerging markets में नहीं है, but I thought the firmness and the resolve that I saw from the finance ministers of the emerging markets was actually both heartening, and it's all about learning from others as well. Now let's come to Pakistan. As I mentioned earlier in other discussions as well, that alhamdulillah, in terms of macroeconomic stability, we have made some very significant progress. Uske sare jo indices hain aapke samne hain. These are being reported as well, whether it's stable currency, FX reserves being over 2 months of import cover. Then the bane of our country has been our twin deficits, which is lack of discipline around whether it's on the fiscal side or on the external side. So getting into a primary surplus situation, notwithstanding आप सब लोग लिखते हैं कि ये windfall आ गया, वो windfall आ गया, आप सही कहते हैं, तो उसकी sustainability की हमें ज़रूरत है. इसी तरह जो current account for the first 7 months, notwithstanding the discussion that we've seen in January, is on a surplus on the back of very strong remittance flows, and of course on the diversification of exports as well. I think we've moved in the right direction, but I'll come back to that in a moment. And then of course inflation has been a good story on the back of policy rate, which is very much the domain of the central bank, but it's SCIBOR, which is critical for all of you who are in the industry or in consumer finance, because from the peak of 23%, it has come down to 11%, and some of the financing has gone into single digit. So I think it's moved in the right direction. Some of the institutional flows have started coming back in on the debt and equity side. I'm always very careful in taking credit for the stock market, it's okay. I think it's a data point which is important, representing the confidence of the investors in the economy. But all of this sort of needs to come together in terms of saying that jo maashi istikam hai, we are in a good place from that perspective, sort of 12 months into this administration. Now, on the back of that, we are not planning, we have been executing structural reforms. So, pehle taxation ki baat kar lein, and all of you who have appreciated what we are doing on the taxation side, I'm very grateful for that, because any transformation, first of all, needs to start from home. So, whatever we are doing in the tax authority in terms of people, process, technology transformation in FBR itself, people changes have been made, more people changes will be made, but ultimately it's all about end-to-end digitalization. जितना हम इसको automate कर दें और पहले जो process हैं उनको rectify कर दें, because if you automate a broken process, it will still remain a broken process. So end-to-end digitalization, uski ek example is the faceless customs, where the GD clearance has come down from an average of about 118, 120 hours to about 18, 19 hours. And the reason for that is कि जितनी human intervention वहाँ कम हुई, तो ये GD clearance में होता क्या था? अब वो बड़ी simple सी बात है कि वो negotiation होती थी. And now that we are in a sanitized environment, so I can't say very earnestly everything has gone away, but I would say 80-90% of that negotiation has gone away, because that 80-90% of the negotiation was simply about speed money and facilitation money. Corruption, in very simple words. So the moment we sort of continue to move in that direction, it'll help the client side, it'll help us in terms of the revenue increase, but this one example. The other is, and I'm very grateful, I keep on saying it in every forum, we are very grateful to the provincial assemblies and the chief ministers for getting the agriculture income tax cleared through the relative assemblies. तो हर एक बात ये करता है कि जी ये कब होगा और फिर ये आगे एग्रीकल्चर इनकम टैक्स आएगा कि नहीं आएगा. From my perspective, you have to walk before you start running. तो 75 साल की हिस्ट्री में ये नहीं हुआ. So I think अगर ये स्ट्रक्चरल रिफॉर्म नहीं है तो मुझे नहीं पता और स्ट्रक्चरल रिफॉर्म आप किसको कह सकते हैं. Obviously through the National Tax Council. Thank you. The National Tax Council, we will start moving in the right direction in terms of making sure, which I chair as the federal minister, the provincial finance ministers are there, where we will start monitoring in terms of the execution of this as we go forward. इससे भी ज़्यादा जो structural चीज़ हुई है, and there I'm very grateful to the cabinet, where we have taken the tax policy out of FBR and put it under the finance ministry, ताकि जो policy है going forward, of course it will take us a little bit of time in terms of operationalizing this, but at least at the policy level we start getting into economic value considerations rather than making the math work. So FBR going forward is just going to be focused on collection in terms of income tax and sales tax and FED and customs duty, etc. But policy is going to be led through economic value, और उसमें हम एक advisory board भी बनाएंगे. आप में से कुछ दोस्तों को और all our friends from the industry उनको request करेंगे कि हमारी advisory board पे आएं, हमें उसमें advise करें in terms of how we take this forward. It'll take a few months before it gets operationalized, but that's where we are headed, and therefore we sort of this year we have preponed the whole budgeting discussion. ताकि ये जनवरी में हमने ये बजट का प्रोसेस किक ऑफ किया, बिकॉज ये कोई ऐसी बात नहीं है, whether it's the banking industry or any other sector, which they are going to come and tell us in April, May, which they won't know or they can't convey at this point in time. We also know where we are. We are in a medium-term fund program, so we know what our constraints are and what we can do or not do and what we can phase in or phase out. So इसलिए ताकि ये by the time we get to the budget, हम थोड़ा सा इसको सस्पेंस को कम करें कि ये क्या आने वाला है बजट में. So that's where I'm also reaching out to various forums, chambers. I was at Sialkot, I was in Faisalabad over the weekend, I'll be in Peshawar next week. and of course with Pakistan Business Council, with Overseas Chamber, we are taking that forward. Energy side, again, Minister Lagari is taking that forward. जो सारी discussion है in terms of tariff reduction, and I do take your in majority at boards, the chairpersons are from the private sector. 3 discos have already been assigned to the privatization. The sell-side advisor has been appointed. इसी तरह जो SOEs की reform है, privatization, we have had a bit of a hiccup, but inshallah PIA is being relaunched. And as I said, the outsourcing of the airports, the discos, we will continue to move forward in that direction. And the last thing I just want to mention is public finance, because I do think that's a very important component of this overall homegrown economic agenda. और उसमें ज़फ़र मसूद साहब मैं आपका बहुत शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहता हूँ, because you helped us in a very big way in your capacity and with your team in terms of working on the homegrown economic agenda which the Prime Minister announced on December 31 under Uran, Pakistan. So we greatly value your contribution, Zafar Saab, in that space. But public finance may, in terms of reducing the footprint of the federal government, reducing that expenditure, I do think is a very important component of what we are trying to do. और इसमें मैं तकरीबन हर फोरम में मैंने आपके पाकिस्तान बिजनेस काउंसिल के फोरम में ये बात की थी कि the study that Dr. Isher did during the PTI administration was a very, very good study. And, dealing with 43 ministries and 400 attached departments. But what I've discussed with him is not the what and the why part of it, but the how part of it. So what we are doing at this point in time is that we are taking it piecemeal. We are taking 5 ministries, we deliberate on that in the right sizing committee, which I chair. We take those deliberations, recommendations into the cabinet, get those ratified back into the implementation committee. तो उसमें कई मिनिस्ट्रीज जो है हमने कहा है कि उनको मर्ज कर दें, एक मिनिस्ट्री को अबॉलिश कर दिया है, कुछ अटैच डिपार्टमेंट्स हैं, which are going to go away. Of course, there's a huge pushback because every single ministry came in saying everything that they're doing is strategic and essential. And of course, that is not the case, because if that were the case, we would not be in the situation that we are in at this point in time in the country. So we are doing what we are doing. So we are almost sort of halfway through in this, and we will monitor the implementation of it, because ultimately it has to result in the upside on the expenditure side and in the budget. And then of course the pension reforms. तो उसमें जो हमने ये कहा है कि the government colleagues who are joining or who have joined as of July 1 are now going to be on defined contribution. It has never happened before. It's never happened before, because what this has allowed us to do is to stop the bleeding. The stock is still there, and we still need to manage the stock. But flow में जो bleeding थी, उसको हमने रोका है as we go forward. Now, 2 other things I just want to mention before I say where do we go from here and coming to the banking industry. 2 existential issues for Pakistan, and I've said that, I will continue to say that in all forums. One is population, the other is climate. So while we had talked about the structural reforms and the homegrown economic agenda, and of course the 5 Ps sort of covers that under Uran, Pakistan, but unless we deal with these 2 existential issues, the sustainable and inclusive growth for Pakistan is going to remain elusive. We are still growing at the rate that we are growing, और उसके basis पे जो 2 बड़े issues हैं from the population perspective, child stunting. Any country which has children under the age of 5, unfortunately 40% of them suffering from child stunting, and then learning poverty, which is essentially girls out of school. Then in terms of climate, both in terms of resiliency and decarbonization. And that's where we are very grateful to the 10-year country partnership framework that we have just signed with the World Bank, because इस दफ़ा हमने 6 issues पे focus किया है in this 10-year partnership framework. 4 of those are dealing with population and climate. 2 dealing with fiscal and the private investment side. So I think it's important that we work with our partners both in terms of financing, but more importantly, capacity building. Now, where do we go from here? And when you get into a bit of a stabilization phase, and we have seen it over the last few decades, and also in the last few years, there's almost a sugar rush. Let's put the foot on the pedal and let's go for it. And we were with Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Saqib, aap wahan the, majood the us council mein as well. And I think it's not only the academics, but also the business community which is cautioning the government in terms of making sure that this time around, when we go for growth, it's sustainable. Because these boom and bust cycles we have seen forever, and it's very easy to get into that trap again and say, let's go for it. And that's where we get into trouble. The imports go haywire. We run out of dollars. We get into a balance of payment problem, and we go running back to the lender of the last resort. So ये जो movie है हम ये पहले देख चुके हैं stabilization वाली. So while I'm very grateful for all the support that we have received, but this time around this opportunity has to be used very judiciously कि हम इसको आगे कैसे लेके चलें. उसमें जो main चीज है in terms of road back to the market, where we say this is going to be the last IMF program, there it has to be export-led growth. We have to fundamentally change the DNA of the economy. And the export-led growth is not only through textiles. It's a fantastic sector. We will continue to help, support, assist that sector. वहाँ value addition भी हो रही है. जो home textiles is doing extremely well, etc. And should it move from 18 to 24 billion dollars? Absolutely, and we will be there to help and support that. इसी तरह IT and IT services में जो growth आई है, I think is a very welcome change. Hopefully, the agriculture part will also continue as we move forward in the growth trajectory. But that is not going to be the answer. Every single sector in this country has to contribute to export. Period. And the spectrum can be from 1% to 100%. Because जो मैंने पहले बात की है और उसी को मैं लिंक कर रहा हूं जो emerging markets finance ministers की जो बात है, productivity-led growth. Productivity means that we have to be internationally competitive. और उसमें हम आपकी support करेंगे, help करेंगे. The industry is there. Of course, we are on the right side of the rate cycle now. Taxation and energy are still elements where we need to support and help you as industry as we go forward. But every single sector, किसी के पास ये गुंजाइश अब ये नहीं होगी कि आप सिर्फ जो है local segments को और local society को, of course, we are 240, 250 million people and therefore it's a very large market. But every single sector has to contribute to the export equation. इसी तरह जो FDI है, and I start with the local investors, local investment आएगी तो FDI आएगी. I am very clear about that. So again, we have to focus on those investments which lead us to exportable surplus. That's very important. And the last thing is international capital markets, so that we get back into the Committee of Nations. We have had very engaging discussions with the rating agencies. You've seen some actions from the rating agencies over the last 12 months. We just had a very constructive meeting with Fitch, who were here on ground about a week back. Or इसी तरह back in the spring meetings in DC, we'll engage with them. And our hope and desire is that we get into a single B category during this calendar year. And inshallah, if we stay the course, we have all this good opportunity that we get back into that so that we can access euro US dollar market. But before that, we are hopeful that we can go for an inaugural panda bond as well. during this calendar year. Now, coming to the banking industry, Zafar Masood Saab, आपने जो बातें की हैं, I'm the first one to acknowledge and recognize all the contributions that the industry has been making over years, over decades. Certainly starting with or COVID में the way industry stepped up, और उसमें I genuinely believe, having had the privilege of being in your position at that point in time and working very closely with the central bank, because COVID के दौरान वो जो एक famous जुमला कहा जाता है, there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happen. So that's, from my perspective, exactly the banking industry stepped up at that point in time when the infrastructure was closed. About 40 to 50% of the branch network was closed during the COVID period, and there was seamless service provided by the banking industry, and I do believe you never look back. Now, having said that, there are areas where आपने भी उसको identify किया है, and the areas where I would request help from the banking industry to stay the course and continue the journey. जो पहली बात हुई है around exports and the remittance agenda, whether it's on the PRI side or the Roshan digital account in conjunction with the central bank, I do think we have a good story to tell. But जितना ये inflow through the formal channels आता रहे, that is going to help the country and keep our current account in a sustainable form. I talked about privatization. I would encourage all the banks to actually come in and help us. You can be on the sell side, you can be on the buy side in conjunction with the foreign partners, but we're very serious and we will pay you. So I think इस पे ज़रूर इसको आगे लेकर चलें. आपने priority sectors की बात की है, SME, agriculture, finance, housing and construction. Now, a lot of banks are already doing this, especially when it comes to SME. A lot of mid-sized banks are actually playing a very important role, especially around the S part of the SME, right? And whatever you are doing in terms of moving from collateral lending into cash flow lending and using algorithmic models, etc., that's the way to go. But I would encourage other large banks to come in and help the SME sector. Please don't say कि ये नहीं हो सकता, वो नहीं हो सकता. अगर mid-sized banks आपको करके दिखा रहे हैं, इसमें आप आइए. Because देखिए, one thing that I have been very clear in the government and in the cabinet, we are not going to go back into directed lending. That's the wrong thing to do, and it does not serve anyone's purpose. So आपने जो बात की incentivization की, we will do what we have to do in terms of providing the necessary subsidy, in terms of providing first loss guarantees from Ministry of Finance, वो हम आपको ज़रूर support करेंगे. इसी तरह agriculture finance, whether it's crops, and even more importantly, what we need to do in terms of dairy and livestock. And then housing and construction. जैसे आपने जिक्र किया, I did meet the Honorable Chief Justice Yahya Afridi Saab, and he was very reassuring in terms of the foreclosure laws and getting those going. उन्होंने जो मुझे नोट वापस भेजा उसमें in terms of special and specialized benches and also the training of the judiciary in the judicial academy. So it's very encouraging that he responded within a couple of days of meeting him. लेकिन हम आपको इसमें help करेंगे. इसमें देखें financing भी है ज़फर मसूद साहब और capacity building भी है. तो आपने ये बात दुरुस्त की है कि आप अपनी बैलेंस शीट्स को दुरुस्त करें, आप अपनी इनकम स्टेट्स को दुरुस्त करें. लेकिन आई नो रहमत हसनी साहब इधर बैठे हैं, जब इनके प्रेडिसेसर यहाँ होते थे, he did a very good job at National Bank in terms of getting to some of the trainings for the SMEs. तो आप समीडा के साथ मिलकर काम करें, because ये उनका रोल है. As far as I am concerned, मैंने तो प्राइम मिनिस्टर का कहा था कि समीडा को बंद करें. इन्होंने 30-40 साल से किया क्या है इस मुल्क में, अगर ये कैपेसिटी नहीं बिल्ड कर सके. But any case, the Prime Minister has taken his under his wings. But आप उनके साथ काम करें और कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग में आप हमारी जो है हेल्प करें. The next one is digital banking and financial inclusion. I think we have come a long way. From my perspective, digital is not an end in itself. It's a means to end. It's better, it's cheaper, it's faster. And also, Atif, aap bhi ye baat karte rehte hain, war on cash, right? And whatever we need to do in terms of getting the POS machines and QR codes, और देखें ये जो अलूला में भी बड़ी बात हुई, most of these emerging markets are now on their digital transformation journey because they know कि इसमें not only financial inclusion, but now some of them are actually advanced enough to talk about AI and digital assets. I know we have our own views at this point in time in terms of regulatory regime कि अभी हम CBDCs की बात कर रहे हैं, etc. बात कर रहे हैं. But the reality is कि अगर crypto already in vogue है in the informal market and the numbers are what they are, even if they are 1/4 of what the numbers are being moved around, we need to think through and be ahead of the cycle in terms of the regulatory regime and think through कि हम ये AI और digital assets को कैसे आगे लेके चलें. Infrastructure finance, public-private partnership, again, some of the banks are already participating in that, both on the debt and equity side. I do think we need to scale it up. Green financing की बात हुई है. It's good to know that the State Bank is now going to roll out the green taxonomy. I do think we are late. We should have done it some time back. Some of the banks are actually already ahead and they're already working on green taxonomy because the green taxonomy आएगी तो पता चलेगा which projects can be designed, structured, monitored and reported on international standards. So, मैं 2-3 दिन पहले Senator Shahri Rahman asked me to join the Senate Committee on climate change, and I said the same thing there. कि ये financing तो जो avenues हैं वो हमारे पास multilateral से भी हैं. Some of the VC funds are coming in and all of that, but ultimately it's coming up with bankable, investable projects, and that's where I do think the banks can play a very important role. इसी तरह जो transition to Islamic banking आपने जैसे जिक्र किया, the industry is moving in that direction, but take advantage of the international experts that you have in this conference. Chansari is here. I had the pleasure and privilege of listening to him, a few months back or a year back. My good friend and ex-colleague Rafe Hanif, he's here from Malaysia. मेरी इकबाल खान साहब से मुलाकात नहीं हुई. I look forward to seeing him during the break. It's all about learning from others. ये जो हमारा mantra है कि हमें सब कुछ पता है इस मुल्क में, इसको थोड़ा सा एक साइड पे अगले 2 दिनों के लिए इसको साइड पे रख दे. हमें बहुत कुछ पता है, but let's take advantage of learning from others. Governance and compliance. The banking industry was off the gates in a very big way. In terms of KYC, AML, sanctions, transaction monitoring, in terms of getting us on the right side of FATF. लेकिन ये जो मैंने देखा है आपके प्रोग्राम में कि आप eKYC को लॉन्च करने जा रहे हैं और उसकी फॉर्मल लॉन्च है, आपको बहुत मुबारक हो. I think that's going to go a long way in terms of client service, but also using the blockchain technology that you're using to get things moving in the right direction. And the last thing I would mention is that banking industry and capital markets have to go hand in hand, because ये जो आप पे सारा बोझ पड़ता है, whether it's on the government side, on the private sector side, capital markets को actually gone back. It was back in 99-2000 that we were talking about WABDA mini retail bonds, mini bonds उस वक्त. So some of the other, we've gone in the wrong direction. So the way I look at it, you and capital markets are tips and whatever you can do in terms of, structure, REITs, etc. And now the banks have been allowed in terms of equity capital markets. I never understood how can banks not be allowed. I mean, most of in the global world, ECM is one of the fantastic way that you leverage your balance sheet. So वो अब आपको मिल गया है. So not only at the GEM board, but in terms of the mainstream advisory and structuring of IPOs, and it's good to see the new IPOs which are coming up in 24 and 25. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I again want to thank you to PBA for the kind invitation. I wish you all the very best for the next 2 days, and we will support the banking industry, Zafar Masood Saab, any way we can. Thank you very much again. Thank you.